going to be absent today. Um, Veronica Babcock said she could not attend today. We have Jared, who has now joined us. And Jared is chairing the food service committee. Nate has to leave at 3:45 to attend a athletic committee meeting. I think that's everyone. So to start off, I listed welcome. I would like to welcome everyone here. Appreciate all the time that you're spending to help our school district kind of devise our plan moving forward for having students and staff return to our school buildings in the fall. Before we really get into today's agenda, I at least wanted to give an opportunity for anyone who's on this call who had a follow-up thought to our last meeting or a comment, an opportunity to be able to share that before we begin today's meeting.
So Pat, one of the thoughts that I've had is about teacher evaluations. So depending on what we decide to do, we need to talk about how that might happen.
Would you, in the minutes, Mary, include that under next steps?
Yep.
So we can at least capture that that has to be discussed. Thank you, I appreciate that. Anyone else? Okay, then if there's no one else, then why don't we get into the meeting? For those of you who have not seen the agenda, again, the agenda is located in the steering committee folder that is in Google Docs. It is labeled steering committee agenda/minutes July 13th. So I've incorporated today's agenda into the minute template, and Mary has offered to take our minutes for today. So what I thought today's meeting could look like, we have a lot to cover in 2 hours. First, I would like to have an update once again from each of the committees, if you would provide a brief update. I want to spend a little more time talking about clarification of committee responsibilities. There continues to be a little bit of a confusion, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. I want to update you on the Maine Department of Education and the regional risk factors that they're going to be sharing with us to help determine the situation in which schools will be able to reopen. I want to update you on the employee survey that we discussed last week. We had a meeting today, and I just want to let you know where that stands. And then want us to enter into the group discussion that we discussed last week. Karen had asked that we have a philosophical conversation. And so Angela has worked with Karen to develop 5 questions for us to discuss. And I would like to give us about an hour and 15 minutes for that discussion. All right. So no later than 4 o'clock. That gives us a full hour to be able to openly discuss and share what our thoughts are around those 5 topics. So I would like to get us started, and just as you're providing an update regarding the work of your committee, to just be cognizant of the fact that we are wanting to be done this portion of our agenda by about 3:45, 4 o'clock at the latest, okay? So if I could start with Angela with the Instruction, SEL, and Technology Committee. Could you give us an update, please?
Yes, we are working on our 3-pronged plan. So in school, hybrid, and remote. Right now, the in-school has been thinking about the learning environment and starting to think about the implications for when students leave their typical learning environment to go to maybe an alternate learning classroom, and how we want to manage that in K-5 versus 6-12. The hybrid group is trying to consider the different models for having students in the building versus out of the building. And so there's a, in order to keep the student numbers low in the building at one time, they're trying to prioritize our earliest learners and our special populations who may need ongoing daily special services as always having opportunities to be in the buildings, and then others being on a rotating schedule of 2 on, 2 off with a day of planning and prep in between. That is not a set, that's not a recommendation we're bringing to this committee yet. It is just the early stages of thinking. And they brought it forth to the larger core instruction committee today for discussion, so that then they could go back and continue to refine their work. And the remote committee has prioritized 2 learning platforms. An early learning platform called Seesaw is what we probably will be bringing to the steering committee for review, and Google Classroom for the others. We've also, at this point, are continuing to think about keeping it as Google Suite or Google Enterprise over Zoom for the long-term cost factors, and the shift in training that would require if we shifted platforms. There were a lot of other details. If you want to see any of those, feel free to look in our minutes and notes, because everything, of course, has many layers to it. And we will be shifting to the thinking about whether you're hybrid or in person with some students remote, what are the tools and resources we need in our classroom spaces to be effective at providing that, and or who will be providing that instruction. So that's kind of where we're at. We're getting a lot done each week. So we're much further ahead this week than we were last week. And I anticipate next week report out will be even more refined. We're trying to reach a target date of 3 draft plans before the end of the month.
Thank you, Angela. Any questions for Angela?
Alicia is on that committee as well. Do you believe that is there anything you want me to add? And Terry?
No, you summed it up.
And Terry shook her head no.
Okay.
Any questions?
I'm not really sure how to articulate the question, but I just wonder about how to really, I'm sure that it's part of your conversations. Your conversations must be loaded. How do you determine those students who would benefit from being in the building? If in fact that's what it comes down to, is that we have some students in and some students not in the buildings. That would be a delicate kind of determination. Who are those students, given that we probably could make a case for the benefits for most of our student population being in the building. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's absolutely true. I don't think we're at that stage, but we will be coming right to that real quick once we start defining some of those populations. And I imagine Alicia will be a critical player in that conversation in terms of our special services, which ones are best, which ones can best be offered in virtual settings, and which ones are really incredibly challenging for virtual settings. I think maybe one of our filters. I know we discussed pre-K and K as being a learning age that's particularly difficult to have remotely because of their independence. And that, I mean, that of course could be said for first and second grade as well. So those nuances is where we need to start heading. I think we're getting there.
Yeah. There's a lot to discuss and a lot to decide in a relatively short period of time. Okay, any other questions for Angela?
Yeah, I have one. So Angela, has there been a discussion with the folk school about what potentially may happen there, or are you sort of just waiting until they come down with the directive?
You know, Dean, I haven't reached out to ask, but I should probably do that to see where, at least what their planning process, and Pat might know because she's involved in the regional superintendents group, and Augusta oversees the Capital Area Tech Center. But I can certainly put that as a inquiry item on my list.
Thanks.
So the school board asked that exact same question last week, Dean, and I have not yet received an update. I have written on my to-do list, Angela, to call Augusta to find out what their current thinking is. I didn't have time to do that today, but that is something I will address sometime this week. And I will make sure that I relay that information to Angela and to the instruction committee. And then we can, most likely we'll have an update for you next week. Okay. Before we move on to Katie and communications, I realized because we're live streamed, at a minimum, I should at least be identifying who is on this committee for members of the public who are watching. And I failed to do that at the beginning. So I'm just going to go back really quickly and just identify who's on it. You don't have to say anything. I just want to make sure that members of the public, that they know who's at the table for this conversation. So I'm Pat Hopkins, superintendent. I'm co-chairing this with Becky Fless, who is the school board chair. We also have Veronica Babcock, who is the school board vice chair. We have Angela Hardy, who's the director of curriculum and instruction. Alicia Morris, who's the director of special services. Karen Moody, who is the principal at the Laura E. Richards School. Gabe Dostie, the director of operations. We have Katie Gould, who is the Helen Thompson principal. We have Nate Stewart, who is the athletic director. We have Jared Dumas, who is an assistant principal at Gardner Area High School. We have Dean Hall, who is a middle school teacher and the president of the Teachers Association. We have Mary Whitten, who is a teacher at the high school. Patsy Adams, a teacher at the elementary level. Michelle Ayotte, who is a parent, and Molly Rogers, who is also a parent. So that's who is here on this meeting. And with that, I would move on to communications and Katie Gould.
Okay, thanks, Pat. So we had a really busy and productive meeting last week. We'll meet again on Wednesday. One thing that we had to present to the instruction committee is some feedback on the language that was used in the critical attributes document that Angela shared last week. From a parent perspective, there was just some feedback to offer around some of the educational jargon that we tend to use. And there were some recommendations for just simplifying some of the language. So I could bounce it back to Angela, but in the interest of time, I'll just keep going. That was just part of our work, and Angela and I haven't had a chance to follow up on any changes that may be made to that document. But I see that Angela, did you want to say anything about that? Okay, I'm going to keep going. We have started working virtually on brainstorming ideas for a video. Angela had found a video that was a slideshow, and it's all about a school district planning for the safe return of students, and the possibility that what that return looks like could be all of the 3 scenarios that we've been discussing each week. So we are in the process of brainstorming ideas for our video. We're going to share out ideas for the video on Wednesday when we meet. And our hope is to push that video out for approval to this group next Monday so that we can share that. So again, it would be, I'm not sure, I haven't timed it out, but no more than 5-minute video that just explains our behind the scenes process, like what this is looking like for us this summer as we plan eagerly for the start of the year. We also at the same time have an idea brewing for a website. And so I'm just going to bounce over and hope that I don't lose you. The idea here would be that on our current MSAD11 website and on all of our school websites, we can access that COVID-19 updates page. We'd like to keep that as is, thinking that regardless of whether we come back together, start together, and then have to close the buildings, that COVID-19 update page will continue to be relevant to us. And we want families, we want everybody to be able to go directly to that page. At the same time, we'd like a return to school link visible on all of our websites so that everybody is aware of the week-to-week updates that will impact our return to school. We'd like to be really transparent about what this process looks like. So that is something that we'd like your permission to move forward with. I'm going to just flip over to the draft that Josh has outlined. We'd like to include guiding principles, the critical attributes document. We'd like to include the information about the 3 possible scenarios. We'd like to provide resources for families who may be feeling worried about the return to school. We'd like to provide an overview and information and keep current each of the categories of committees that we currently have. So we'd like to have a specific transportation portion, and we'd like to be able to really break down what that looks like. That's where we could load videos. If we're able to create a video that shows what it looks like to board the bus, you know, wearing a mask or not, that's all to be determined. Food service, you know, we'd like to be able to have all of the information about what food service in each of our different facilities is going to look like in its own section on a return to school website. Again, we have that drafted and ready to go, and we certainly wouldn't publish it without your permission, but we'd like to be able to move forward, and I could show you a draft of that the next time we meet, if that sounds reasonable to you. And Alyssa Tracy and I met. She's a member of our committee and a member of our school board. We met this morning. Her work actually is project manager, and so she is fluent in communication planning. And so she is working to create a flow of communication that just might help inform all of our committee work for the how and when we communicate. We're thinking about just a flow chart for simplicity, so that if there's an idea around instruction that should be pushed out from all of our schools, we'd like to be able to just sort of systemize that for consistency, for convenience and transparency across all of our buildings, across the district. And what we'd like to be able to do is, in doing so, promote some sort of schedule of weekly updates or bi-weekly updates. And then finally, I have communicated with the elementary nurse team there about an idea to create a little video promotion around the different kinds of masks that you may see when you come back to school, and also promote safely putting on your mask, taking off your mask. I've heard from 2 of our 3 elementary nurses, and they are very much on board. So again, I know that my opportunity to report out is short, but I would love to be able to share with you as many of those things that we've got in the works as possible, so that I'm not taking up too much time here and now, but for you to be able to see this, I know would be more powerful than me just explaining it. So that's what we have in the works. I'm open to any questions that you have. I also wanted to let you know on behalf of communications that if there are specific things that you need our help with, please be super explicit in your notes. We have, like I had shared last time, committee liaisons who are reporting out and reviewing every committee's notes. But if there is something highlighted or draw our attention to it, we're more than happy to do anything that's needed. Before I finish, I do just want to say that with your approval, we'll keep working on the website and that flow of communication. Again, we won't publish or share anything until getting final approval from you all.
Wow, Katie, you have been incredibly busy, you and your committee. Sounds like you've accomplished a lot in just one short week. I would say you absolutely have my permission, and I would put it out to the committee to see if there's anyone who objects. but you have my permission to really move forward with those videos that you discussed and the website. I think the more information that we can get out for families, the better. I have received a couple emails with parents who've been working at home, and they need to be able to report back to their employer when they're going to be in the position where they can go back to the office. And they're unable to do so until they know what the school is doing. So the more we can provide them information, I think the better off. Other comments, feedback, Karen?
Yeah, just two quick ones. So the other thing, Katie, that you might want to consider doing is reaching out to Joanna Joy again from the Healthy Communities of the Capital Area for resources for families. I think she might be able to give you some other resources out more than what the district knows about. And the second thing is, and I know Pat, you forwarded an email to me too. I had gotten an email from the CDC. I have a CDC. I can't think of the gentleman's name right now, but he sent me a poster that I can also forward with, and that might be something you want to include on the with the website as well.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my only two things. But great, sounds
Great
great.
ideas. Great ideas, Karen. Thank you.
Karen,
Mary, did you have something?
I needed to ask Karen to tell me who that was in the healthy.
Joanna Joy.
Joanna Joy.
Yep. I believe
Thank you.
it's not Joanna.
It's Joanne. No, it's Joanne Joy. But Joanne's retiring, so it's going to be Renee.
Oh yes, I see her face.
Sorry, I know Renee. I'm blanking on her last name.
What's the name of the organization? I'll put that there, and then we can figure out.
Healthy Communities of the Capital Area.
Okay, thank you.
Patricia Welton is the administrative assistant with Healthy Communities. She could perhaps be helpful to guide us there as well.
Anything else for Katie in communications? Molly?
Katie, just in regard to the flow chart, or putting the information out there, the attachment this past week of the Georgia's Path to Recovery, they had listed all of their information in a very organized chart fashion, and I just think it's a helpful example of one way that they listed everything out and sectioned it out separately so that it was very easy to find answers to quick questions. So just another way to follow.
Yeah, I completely agree, Molly. That whole chart, that whole organized structure spoke to me completely. And I think that there's a way that we could do something like that. It wouldn't have to be, the yellow, the red, the yellow, the green. It could be something else, but organized that way, sort of by category, really reader friendly. Yeah, good point.
Yeah. And hidden somewhere in the American Academy of Pediatrics, there was one line that kind of struck me, and it was just watching the language that's used in all of it. And I know we're all being cognizant of it, but just from a mental health perspective, being cautious not to use like fearful language and the way things are phrased. So just to keep in mind.
I'm glad you said that, Molly. A big part of our conversation, well, not a big part, but noteworthy part of our conversation last week was just that messaging. And we get it, and we know that our families are keeping it real right about now, right? As they're struggling in so many other ways. And this is a really big decision. And the sooner that they can know where their kids are going to be in the fall, the better. But, just we've thought about some tips and suggestions for how to have that real conversation, what that conversation and sort of making the most of it spin at the elementary level, with conversations with kids that age is going to be very different than high schoolers, who are more strongly rooted in what they want and how they feel about getting back to a new normal. So.
Anything else for Katie? I'm doing a time check. It is now 3:30. Okay, then I'm going to move us along to Nate and athletics. Can you give us a brief update, please?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. So we've just completed our first week of high school athletic conditioning, and things went extremely well. Coaches are all doing a fantastic job adhering to all the recommendations set forth by the MPA, Maine General, CDC, etc. I want to publicly thank them. The amount of time and effort that they're putting in to their athletes, it's unprecedented. It's very similar to teachers having to all of a sudden learn how to teach remotely. It's the same thing with the coaches. They're dealing with smaller groups. They're putting in an extraordinary amount of time dealing with those groups, and they're doing a fantastic job doing it. So I really appreciate all the time and effort that they're putting into our athletes. We're starting the second week of phase 1 today, which we already started, and phase 2 starts on Monday the 20th. So phase 2, the difference between phase 1 and phase 2 is that phase 1 is conditioning only. There's no balls, sticks, bats, any sort of apparatus that does any sort of skill building. It's just conditioning only. So phase 2, starting on July 20th, we'll start incorporating those skill type activities. So balls and things like that can be used. I talked to Pat last week about what that's going to look like for us. And we agreed that we could start using the gymnasium and the weight room to help with our athletes. And so today at 4 o'clock is the next athletic committee meeting, and we'll be discussing what the parameters of phase 2 will look like, especially in the gymnasium and in the weight room, and how many athletes will be allowed in each space at a time, what cleaning will look like, and so on and so forth. I talked to Gabe today about what kind of equipment, sanitizing materials will be used. So we're all set with that. And that's pretty much it. And I know, Dean, you had a question last week about middle school athletics, and I responded in an email. I'm not sure if you got it, but I just wanted to let everybody know it brought up a good question. Dean asked about the Maine Principals Association and if the middle school athletics had if the middle school were going to follow MPA guidelines and regulations. And my response is that the MPA doesn't have jurisdiction over middle school athletics. It's only over high school athletics in the state of Maine. But with that said, we still follow the same guidelines as high school athletics follow. For instance, if we aren't going to have a fall season for high school athletes, then we certainly wouldn't have a fall season for middle school athletes. So that's my response in short. So if that answers your question, Dean. And also last week's meeting, Pat, you had asked about porta potties at the high school. They were delivered last week. Unfortunately, they were put in the wrong location. So today I called them, and they're going to be moved on Thursday, but they are at the high school, but they're not where I asked them to be placed. So Gabe's aware of that, and custodians are still going to clean them where they are located right now. So that's the update I have for now.
Great. Thank you, Nate. I appreciate that. Any quick questions for Nate? Okay. Jared stepped away. Jared, have you returned?
Yes.
Oh, he's back. All right. So quick update on food service, please.
Sure. Getting to work with Linda Sargent and a lot of the nutrition staff, custodial staff, instructional staff are all very helpful and know a lot, which is great because we have a lot of questions. And every time we answer a question, we have more questions. But the two premises that drive our work are the idea that we're going to try and streamline as much as we can while recognizing that each grade level is going to be a little different, at least each building level. And we really want to give building principals as much flexibility as possible while making sure that we're meeting the guidelines, because a lot of these things are going to need to be tweaked and tailored for buildings and different ages. But we've also been looking at all three of the models, the in-building, the remote, and the hybrid. We are definitely trying to come up with a way to streamline things, as I mentioned, which for Linda looks like, pretty much, limiting menu options, planning menus ahead of time so that it's very clear what's available. We're working on coming up with some form of pre-ordering so we know specifically, if not day by day, then week by week, who's looking for meals and who's not. Obviously, that's going to change depending on whether we're in the building or part in, part out. We have considering the possibility of delivering food if we can do so while meeting the health and safety standards related to meals and how long they can be, out and about, so to speak. We're hoping to develop a model that would allow families to pick up the meals. We really have thought that would be best, ideally, if we can do the same times and the same days in all locations and get that messaging clear. We have some questions around getting together with, I should say, Gabe, we'd love to connect with you and maybe sit in your conversations, because we think the extent to which drivers and buses are available is going to have a big impact on whether or not we can deliver or pick up. If we're in a hybrid model, for example, we think it's going to be tricky to deliver and get kids to and from school. But maybe you and I can connect about how to get our group updated on that. Finally, the costs that we anticipate would mainly be around the cost of packaging food if we're going to push meals out, particularly if we're going to try and streamline and push out the hot meals that are already being prepared by the nutrition staff. So packaging for that, and if there are any potential staff hour changes. But we feel like generally we have the other things we need to even make access of classrooms for feeding if we have to, and maintaining the social distancing. That's my super brief update, because I know there's other committees, but I certainly would answer any questions now or later.
Just for clarification, just for everyone who's on this, in this meeting, just to make sure everyone understands that if we are having students receive their education from home, and at the same time kind of using this hybrid model, we have students in school, we are required by the feds to provide a meal regardless of where that child is when they are receiving their education. So I just want to be really clear. So if we're doing a hybrid model, we're feeding students while at school, and we still need to find a way to make sure that those students receive food while at home.
Absolutely. And one of Linda's ideas in that situation would be to prepare the food and to serve the food to the students in the building while packaging and making available for pickup that meal. We talked about the possibility of going to the bag lunches like we did this spring, and it's just going to be so much smoother for Linda to do a single meal prep and then package that food, as opposed to trying to make bag lunches and hot lunches. That was the biggest consideration, is just the time. But yes, you're absolutely right, and we do know that we need to feed everybody. That should be one of our tenets as well, as a given that everybody's getting fed.
Right. All right. Thank you, Jared. If there are no immediate questions, I'm going to move on because we are quickly running out of time here. Gabe, can you combine transportation and facilities in one brief report?
I will do my best, definitely. And to Jared, yes, if if we need to meet, we can make a separate meeting, so I can kind of, both of us can get together and figure it out. One of the topics we did talk about at the transportation meeting was if my staff could be used other than just transportation, but there again for food distribution, maybe between the morning and afternoon runs if they need to be used that way. However they need to be used. We also talked about potentially if they're available and would be willing to, if they could do additional disinfecting at the schools, that sort of thing. So kind of used in other manners other than just driving a bus if need be. So that's something we can talk about. But in the transportation meeting that we had, I handed out all the information about the shields that we had received some additional information on for the drivers, for the kind of the curtain that goes between the driver area and the rest of the bus. So Cressy does have a bus that they are outfitting with that sort of device. It's kind of like a vinyl shower curtain, heavy duty, velcros down, protects the driver from the student area. Also, there was information on dividers that go between each seat if we were looking at doing some sort of shield there. So they're prepping the bus with all the components in it, and we'll be bringing it around. So we just need to find out the date that it's going to be in the area so we can go take a look at it. So I did pass all that information out. Also, some additional information about the capacity in the buses and how we could potentially fit as many on as we can. if we wear face masks, and they are provided to all the students, then if we could, you know, the idea is to get as many as possible on the school bus. But if they're wearing masks, do we have to keep the same distancing? And there again, siblings could sit together in the same seat. One of the pieces that really everybody was really pushing for was to have an aide on the bus to do, you know, at least for the first couple weeks, to do the seating placement so everybody knows where to sit. If we need to supply masks, they hand them a mask, they give them the mask, and potentially to do the screening right there at the bus stop. I'm sure that's something to age dependent, but our buses are the first contact with the school district. And that was quite a conversation that we had right there, was the screening part at the bus stop there before they even get to school. And that kind of leads into the facility piece. We spoke greatly about the entrance of the buildings and how if they were screened at home, we could have an entrance separate from anybody that would need to be screened. So that way the students that were screened at home or on the bus would be able to enter straight into the building, go right to the advisor's classroom. Wouldn't need to join a long line that's going to be at the front of the building to get screened, especially at the high school, which is where we held our meeting. The high school has a large number of students, and if all students, staff, everybody's being screened, it's going to take a considerable amount of time to do that. Even if we had multiple screening areas, it's still going to take quite a bit of time. And that was part of it. If we did screening at home, they would go in one entrance straight in. The other screening would be either separated at the main entrance. So one side of the main entrance would be screening, the other side could walk right in. Or if we completely separated it, and we could have the screening at, say, the cafeteria entrance completely separate from the main entrance, so there would be no confusion. And it kind of separates the two main groups. The buses would drop off at the front doors, not way up in the parking lot, so they could drop off at the front doors and go right straight into the building. We also discussed a quarantine area. If somebody did not pass the screening, where do they go? Where do we place them? And so we would need to find some sort, either a room or make an area for them to sit at. If they sat in that room, it's not necessarily correct to say that they have COVID-19, but they might just have a cold. They might just have a flu, and one might have it and one not. We don't want them in the same area, so they need to make sure they were 6 feet apart at all times and have a mask in that area that they were sent off to. I hate the word quarantine room, but kind of that's the separate room we would need to have, and we would need to find that room if we were screening at the cafeteria end, or make some sort of area. Again, it can't just be outside. Middle of winter, it's just too cold. The other piece is mapping out the school, which I've started working on mapping hallways. I actually walked around before the meeting with Jackie Perret, and she's done some work on mapping out the school. We know we need to try to keep as much as possible one way, one direction. So there's no just, random walking through the halls anymore. Areas, most of the halls over there are very wide because we took the lockers out. But there again, a lot of schools have very narrow hallways, and it may not be able to do two-way traffic in those hallways. So to try to map out the traffic pattern. The stairs at the high school, they're about 5 feet wide. All the stairs, there's one set that's down by the adult ed section that's only 3 feet wide. So it's a really narrow set of stairs. So potentially stairs might have to be just one direction. So it's just mapping it out, but we all agreed that trying to keep it as simple as possible, to not overcomplicate things. The worry is when students get in the morning, they're just going to be overwhelmed and not know where they need to go, or have to walk a lot further just to get to certain classrooms. I could go on. We had quite a meeting. There was a lot that we talked about. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you, Gabe. Any immediate questions for Gabe?
So,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, so when you read the American Academy of Pediatrics, it had a discussion about screening and how viable that really is and weighing the pros and cons of all of that. And one of the questions I had about that too was, if we have a staff member who's not medically trained doing screening and somebody gets COVID, is there a liability issue? So that's a piece that we might want to think about as well. So
That's exactly
And-
what I meant.
We have Gabe and Charles going down Wednesday in Southern
Yep.
Maine somewhere to look at a piece of technology on screening. So it wouldn't be an individual who would be screening, there would be a machine that would be there. And what I would say about liability is we are always at risk. No matter what we do, we're always at risk of being sued. It comes back to whether we were negligent. As long as we were doing our best, that we had procedures, clear procedures in place, we were abiding by those procedures, then we would be fine. It would not be a liability issue. That doesn't mean that you can't be sued. That doesn't mean you don't go to court. It doesn't mean all of that. But bottom line is we should be fine. It is 3:45 and we still need to hear from Karen and the resource committee. So if we could move on to Karen.
Sure, and mine is very, very brief. So we had a very short meeting. We decided to kind of hold off a little bit on what we were going to do until we started seeing some work show up on those tables and the documents that I sent to all of the chairs and co-chairs. We did assign liaisons to all of those committees. Their job is to review the minutes of your meetings, as well as what you've put on the tables to keep us aware of that and to start doing. So if you put something on there like the signage that Gabe was looking at, and there isn't anything in there for costs and information, that person's going to start doing some of that work. We just need to know what the items are. So that's really where we are right now. And I do need to get back in touch with Angela. Her committee that she chairs is 3 parts. So it's instruction, technology, and SEL. And we weren't sure whether we should just do one person or one per each of those subcommittees. So Angela, you and I can chat again later. I mean, if it makes more sense just to have one person, that's fine. But that's it. Mine's short and sweet.
Great, thanks. I mean, personally, I would say, Karen, given the size of the instruction committee, it's already so large, just having one person serve as a liaison from your committee, since all of those committees report to the one larger committee. I mean, that makes the most sense to me versus having multiple liaisons. Otherwise, I think it just gets too complicated. But anything for Karen? Okay, thank you, Karen. Appreciate it. I appreciate everyone's update. I really do think it's absolutely remarkable at how much work you are all accomplishing in such a short period of time. Moving us forward very quickly, the rest of this should not take too long. Clarification on committee responsibilities. There continues to be questions about the roles and responsibilities for each subcommittee. And Angela, sorry. Angela created a flow chart. If you're willing to share that flow chart, Angela, that I think helps guide for all of us the role and responsibilities for each committee. So I will stop speaking. If you could pull that up on the screen.
Sorry, this one. So can you see an orange and red thing that says return to school? Okay, because it's a PDF, so it shows up over the folder. This is, in some ways it's a flow chart, in other ways it's kind of just clarifying the responsibilities in a really succinct way, especially because we have so many staff members, community that are learning a lot over the summer and have some great questions and ideas. And this might help us just very quickly think about who needs that information. And so we start with the steering committee. The steering committee has the oversight, is attending to the core values of our work, which is what we'll be going into shortly, and reviews the recommendations. And so there's a little narrative about that. The result is a comprehensive return to school plan for the board to review. Then the communications committee works on the communicating process outcomes and next steps with the public. I know it's much more behind the scenes work than that, but that's kind of the public facing end of communications. And all of this is about learning. So then we move into the core instruction. The SEL and technology in core is actually embedded in each of our core instruction subcommittees rather than a separate entity. We're trying to have the learning drive the plan, and then the SEL and technology aspects support the learning plan. And so that's where the in-person, remote, and hybrid scenarios will come from. And that will move again up through all these other committees. Facilities, food service, and transportation committees are managing the flow of people and cleaning practices for safety, the transportation for learning, and the approach to meals for students. So anything related to like, how are people going to enter the building and move through the hallways? Because there's a lot of people wondering those questions. These are the committees that are really managing that. The resource committee is responding to the needs of the committee to make sure that we have the resources that each committee needs, that we have the funding to support that. They have also the staffing to, or the committee membership to do some of the research behind the resource needs. And as Karen said, they kind of put themselves on a very brief pause because some of us need to catch up. They're ready to go, and we're not quite there yet, but we're close. Athletics, and that's a grade 6 through 12 perspective. So anything related to athletics, we'll head over to Nate's committee. And these are the things that are a little bit that we added on because I think some of the questions are actually related to these groups here. Associations like the Teachers Association and the Ed Techs Association and I don't know all the titles, but there's a number of them that Pat and the school board work with. And that's really where some of these working conditions are going to show up. And while a lot of the questions that are coming forward we're seeing in the kind of the national narrative too, they're very important, but a lot of them can't be answered until we have kind of the learning plan in place and some of these flow and safety measures figured out. Then we'll be able to start redefining or defining the working conditions under each of those spaces. And the association has representation on every committee, but they also will have to probably have a separate period of time where their leadership will be working directly with administration and the school board to kind of refine some of those pieces and put them forward into our soon to be developed employee handbook. And then, of course, the school board plays a really integral role in all of this. They have representation across the committees, including the steering committee, but they are also the ones who will actively review the final comprehensive plan moving forward, likely after, well, maybe, I'm not sure if it'll be some of it before or after the date that the state releases their guidelines that we then need to align our work to those state guidelines. But the board also is a part of setting the working conditions for staff. So those folks who are asking a lot of those types of questions, I think it's important that we continue to collect them. And some of those questions will show up in this committee. But some of them also have kind of roles a little bit outside of this committee that will parallel the work of this committee, but will be determined based on the plans that this committee and all of our committees design. And then the last bullet here is a target date. We may have to change that, we don't know, but we're trying to come out as soon as we can with information for our families and our staff regarding what are our next steps. School is currently slated to start on August 31st. The state is currently saying that they plan on releasing, their final guidance around August 7th, and we would need a few days to then align our plans to whatever those guidelines are, and then move forward. So this is should try to create some level of clarity about when this information and when all these plans will need to be finalized. I don't know if this is helpful to you or not, but I've been getting so many questions that I was trying to figure out who to copy and paste and forward the questions to, and which ones go directly to Pat and which ones are kind of compiled for another organization or group to review.
So Angela, I think it might be helpful if this got sent out to all the members that are working on the Return to School Roadmap Committee. For a purpose that happened at my meeting last week. Somebody wanted to start talking about the hybrid model and what are all of those? What do they look like? And I'm like, that's not the role of our committee. We're not going to decide that. We shouldn't be spending our precious 2 hours talking about that. We have other things we have to be charged with. So I think if you sent this out to everyone who's on that, so they could really see like, okay, this is that other committee's doing that. I don't need to worry about that part.
I'm happy to send it out to anyone and everyone that you think would benefit from it, but I think it was only finalized, the draft was only finalized at like 6 a.m. today, and so Pat wanted to bring it to this group to make sure that it made sense for our work, that it helped create some of that that kind of at a glance document, so we know where and who to direct attention to. Because everyone's role is very important. So we just want to make sure we can be efficient.
Are you guys getting questions from outside of committee members? Because I was thinking that this might be something to share with everybody, staff and parents and our community as a whole.
I think as Katie and the communications committee, as they ramp up the website that she just shared with us, I think that this is a document that I would like to see added. If we're going to include information on our work, then I think it makes sense for the community to be able to see how that work has been sparsed out among all of us 8 committees and the association and school board. So I agree with you, Mary. Anything else then? Is everyone all right with this document? I find it extremely helpful.
And I just want to add super quickly that in case anyone is watching, if you have questions and you don't know who to ask them to, do please reach out. Like I welcome any questions that have been coming my way. And some of the questions I've seen through different news feeds, and some of the questions I've seen from different staff members reaching out to me, like some of them repeat, but that's good because that also indicates, what's really on people's mind and how pressing of a concern is that. And it will help us collectively be really responsive. So I want to make sure that this provides clarity about which groups are tending to which pieces of work, but we don't want it to limit people from feeling like there's an open door.
Great. Angela, thank you very much. I appreciate your work on this. Moving us forward very quickly then, just 2 additional items. First is the Maine Department of Education. I think when we first started, I shared with all of you and with others that it was my understanding that the Department of Education would be determining whether schools could open or not. That information has been clarified with me, and the Department of Education is not going to be dictating whether a school can open or not. Instead, they're going to use the Georgia model, something Molly referenced earlier, and they're going to be using these risk factors. They will be determining what the risk factors are. They'll be using the colors red, yellow, green, and determining regionally what our color is. And then under the color, what the parameters, what parameters must be in place in order for us to safely return back to school. Now, We have heard all along the date of August 7th, which is late, but at the same time, it gives them the most current scientific data available to them. Just today, I heard rumblings that the information might be out sooner, that we might see some preliminary information as early as this week or next week, with the understanding is that they will continue to modify that as the data continues to come in. So as the summer progresses, we could start out maybe as yellow and then turn to green. Or we could start as green and turn to yellow, which is why we would need to make sure that we have all of our plans in place, so that whenever we're told what our color is, we are quickly able to shift gears and address the needs of our students based upon the risk factors and the needs of our staff based upon those risk factors. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. I really like Georgia's model as well. I love the detail that they provided, and it is my hope that the state of Maine will do something similar. So I will keep you posted as soon as I receive any additional information around those models. I did want to update you very quickly on the employee survey. The last time we met, I indicated that Mary, Dean, Patsy, and myself, we actually added Chad to the conversation, that we would meet to develop a survey of staff to find out whether there are any staff members who have medical condition that would require some form, sorry, I have a tickle, some form of accommodation in order to return in the fall. We met earlier today. We've identified the question. The survey is going to go out on Wednesday, and we're going to give staff a week to respond. So by the time of your meeting on the 27th of July, we should be able to share with you the number of staff members who will require some form of an accommodation. Keeping in mind, we can't share the specifics because that would be confidential, but at least we can give you an idea of the number of staff that will need some support, so that as we develop our plan, we know what our staffing needs are going to be. We also have received a draft copy of a staff handbook. It was developed by Biddeford and Gorham, and they have graciously distributed that to every school district across the state for us to use as a template. So I will be reaching out to the presidents of all of our associations, and we have tentatively scheduled a meeting for, I think, the morning of Thursday, July 23rd, so that we can start work on that. And it is also my understanding that those two school districts, Biddeford and Gorham, are also now working on a student handbook, and that they will once again be distributing those to all school districts across the state, so we can use that as a template, a great starting point, so we could then develop our own student handbook. So publicly, I'd like to thank those superintendents, Heather Perry and Jeremy Ray, for doing all of that work and making these available to us. So that work will be happening behind the scenes, and we'll keep you updated. And that is all that I have, and it is 4:03, so we are 3 minutes behind. And the next part is the group discussion, our cultural expectations for MSAD 11. I'm going to turn this back over to Angela. Angela has created a process for which we can follow today to answer some clear questions, and really for us to develop what we want for expectations and guidelines in MSAD 11. Angela.
Thanks, Pat. So this rose out of last week's conversation where we recognize there are some pretty big issues, and we need to be able to develop some consensus as a group that can then be carried forth into each of the subcommittees' work. The request was to really be thinking about what do we believe in and what kind of practices support that. And when kind of mulling over that, I recognize that culture is actually developed through an implementation of beliefs and practices. So we're moving into a space where we are kind of redefining our culture in our district. And so we have this opportunity to take a pause and really be thinking about where we want to head as a district. But there are a couple parameters for us to think through. So we're going to use a process called a text-based seminar. So there aren't strict protocols in this conversation. We will have 10 to 12 minutes for each section. You received a group discussion document that you could have used for note-taking if you chose to, but you could see that there's 5 sections that we're going to go through. School closure, so opening, closing, being in the physical space or not, curriculum, use of space, face coverings, and physical distancing for today. We'll probably need to spend some more time on some other very specific conversations around very granular questions. Those will come as a result of understanding where we stand on these topics. So how we'll move forward is first, please just honor the diverse perspectives that we bring. Share the air. So just look for the cues of others. If someone needs to speak, I'll help with that as well. But try to be cognizant of how much time you're sharing so that others have a chance to speak. And build off of each other's thinking. So if you agree with someone, feel free to recognize that publicly, but don't feel that you necessarily have to repeat those statements because we want to be really cognizant of time. And then lastly, and the most importantly, please stay grounded in the text. So we asked you to read the American Association of Pediatrics guidelines. That was our primary text. Pat also sent to you some resources and guidelines from the Georgia Department of Education and the Massachusetts Department of Education. You're absolutely welcome to cite those resources in your conversation as well, but please clarify when you say, I believe that we should do X, or I believe that we should head in this direction. I believe this because, and really try to ground it in the American Association of Pediatrics or another medical source or some understanding that another organization has offered, so that we all understand where you're coming from, but also anyone who's listening in and watching this video who has not done the reading will have an understanding of what readings are rising up, and they may choose to then seek those readings out. So those are the kind of the parameters. That make sense?
Angela, I have a question.
Yes.
What do you want me to capture in the minutes?
Mary, I think I'm going to take some handwritten notes on the actual group discussion document. So I think probably not the discussion, but the end point of each section. Does that make more sense?
That's what I was thinking. So,
Okay, great. So we're going to start with school closure. You can define that in your ways, but the prompt was this: what conditions make the learning environment effective, and what practices support that? When do the risks outweigh the benefits? Does the district have a strong preference for either in-person or remote learning? So what we're trying to get at here is, are we trying to move toward in-person as much as possible, given the medical or state guidelines, or do we actually feel like we have a slightly different stance than that? What has to be true for us to feel really confident in our decision to be in person or to not be in the building and to work differently? And you can interpret that as you wish, but let's start just on that one. Effective learning environments, what do you believe we should do and why? And feel free to discuss risks and benefits. No one wants to start. It's a hard one.
well, I made myself a note here after reading the American Association of Pediatrics document that our students and staff need to feel safe and minimize the anxiety they have coming back into the school. And so I think that's an important piece that we would need to have in place if we're going to bring anybody back into the buildings.
That's great. That was a perfect model, Mary, of how you would share.
I did see kind of in addition to that from the American Academy of Pediatrics, it does emphasize in person, being physically present, and the importance, especially of younger students. So the K5 or K2, I don't know, exactly how they define that, but the importance of them both socially, obviously the education, but to kind of echo what Mary was saying later on when it spoke about the mental health, it said that the physical education and not just the strict core subjects being emphasized, but making sure that they're receiving all of the subjects, and as it relates to also the food security. So I know we touched on that with the food services, but making sure that the food is available and that they're safe at home and at school. Also that there was something I had not heard of anywhere else, but in regard to the distancing for younger students, if they're masked, that perhaps only 3 feet may be just as effective as the 6 feet social distancing that they recommend for adults. So, and then adult spaces, teachers not needing or discouraging teachers from grouping or gathering together. So it came to my mind, and please, I hope I don't offend any teachers, but if we're looking for spaces to hold possibly sick or infected or anyone that needs to wait, are the teachers' rooms a possible option for an extra space that we're looking? I don't want to steal that space from any teacher. They need it as well, but it was just a thought. So that's it.
So Molly, just to reflect on what you said, it sounds to me like your belief is that based on the readings you've done, that if we can be in person using these safety measures, the recommendations support it, especially for the pre-K to 5 environment, and you would support it.
True.
And I also echo Molly, and I also loved the article. I thought that article hit it really great. It broke it really down specifically. I think another key idea in this was not to make school a stressor as well, that it's going to be really important that we are not caught up in got to catch the kids up. They've lost so much time in instruction, and making that our priority. We can't do that to kids, because that will, on top of the pandemic issues, cause even more issues for security and anxiety and stress. And that will also lead to home issues as well. So it just has that domino effect. So we're going to have to be really cognizant of meeting kids where they are and being practical and realistic.
Can I just add, we also have to be thinking about our staff and their mental health when they're coming to school. Because if we have staff that are coming and saying that they, that they feel safe and they feel comfortable, but then you have a little one that their mask may be over their nose or they're touching their face, we can't have teachers constantly, telling the kids that they need to put your face mask up, that's not safe, or go wash your hands, because then that's going to instill fear in the kids as well. So I think we also have to be very mindful of the way that administrators present to staff and model, so that they can do the same for the students.
And I think that happened a little bit, Alicia, back in the spring, but just before we actually closed, when some of the concerns started coming in, and teachers were finding it really difficult to have the kids doing all the hand washing over and over and over again. And I think what we'll have to do is have some new routines built into the day, so we're not stressed out about having the kids go to the sink every 2 minutes. But these are the specific times we're going to do hand washing. It'll be after. Before or after eating, and after center play, and certainly after using the playground. So yeah.
And it's important. I mean, the little ones need to play, and they need to be able to have hands-on and do activities and not be scared to get close to their friends. I think we could do a lot of mental health damage to the little ones if this is their first experience and it goes wrong.
Dean, it looked like you were leaning in. Did you want to say something? And then Jared, you'll be next.
Yeah, what I wanted to say basically is one of the questions I forwarded to you is if we're going to come up with these policies, we must adhere to them. Whatever policies we come up with in terms of what students are going to do, what they're going to wear, how they're going to distance. And I don't want to make this a big political issue right now, but you know, we all know what's going on in the real world. And there's a big divide between those who are, I guess, true believers and that there actually is a pandemic, and others who are not so much, and who have basically, if you read Facebook and other places, I've seen parents who have said, this doesn't exist and just get my kid back to school. And my concern is we're going to have parents or / students who are going to be very reluctant, maybe even adamant about not following policies. And if we come up with policies, we must stick with them.
Yes, so Dean, I think that's why we're spending so much time right now having these discussions, so that when we come to some agreements in our beliefs and practices, policies can be shaped that support those. And then we can develop a plan of action if we find that there's a family that's not comfortable with following those. And that's partly why we, not only for the red, green, and yellow system based on data, but also, you know, there may be families who will say, even with the mask policy, I know that I'm not comfortable sending my child to school, or with a mask policy, I am not comfortable sending my child to school. And so I think we're going to be responsible for coming up with a couple alternative ways of learning, or we have to come to an agreement as to whether we will be responsible for that. I'm not quite sure where that line is. But your statement of anytime there is a policy that ends up being developed, which we're not quite there yet, you're right. It's important that you then act upon that and create avenues to protect our staff and our students in our learning spaces. Yep. Jared, do you want to add?
Sure, and I think it actually is a good comment to follow up on Dean's comment with, and looking at the Georgia document where they lay out the importance of the behavioral health and emotional support for children and adolescents, and then followed up directly by, you know, to Alicia's point, the comment about mental health of staff. When I look at the question that you posed, which is what conditions make the learning environment effective and what practices support that, part of my perspective is that upon returning to school, I hope that we'll be able to make an emphasis with our students and our staff and everybody that there's been kind of a, through no fault of anyone, kind of a breakdown in the relationship and the trust and the connection that we've had with our students and with our students in particular. They were pulled out of school on very short notice and will have been out of school for about 6 months. And where the document talks about, you know, food insecurity, unemployment, mental health supports or lack thereof at home. My big point on what makes a learning environment effective and what practices would support the learning environment would be, you know, a lot of understanding and patience and willingness to work with students and willingness to, you know, promote with staff the idea that we do want to get kids learning and we do want to get back into the flow of education, but we have to try and figure out how to put some first things first, which is, you know, something along a hierarchy of needs of feeling comfortable, feeling safe, feeling understood, feeling mentally and emotionally ready to be involved in school. And you know, I know from my position, which obviously I have a lot of interactions with students, often different ones than teachers, but you know, the idea for me is going to be remembering that we don't know where everybody's coming from. We don't know what everyone's experience has been, but we can imagine it's not been pleasant for everyone, and trying to color our interactions with kids and our work around, you know, taking a breath and helping everybody to kind of be ready for what comes next. And I, you know, what that looks like exactly, time will tell, but that's certainly an important piece for me beyond any of the obvious pieces around PPE and distancing and being physically safe is also, you know, remembering that this is not going to be easy for everybody, and that we need to, you know, approach our work with our kids with that in mind.
And with curiosity. So we've spent a fair amount of time on the early learners or the pre-K5, and then Jared and Dean started bringing through a kind of a more independent learner perspective, but it can be transferable to all ages. Is there anything we want to lift up about the grades 6 through 12 learners based on your reading and the effective learning environment beyond what's been shared?
So Angela, I think that in that pediatrics document, the 3 to 6 feet piece maybe give us a little more flexibility in some of our buildings and our classrooms. And I think as we bring students back, we just create as safe an environment as possible. And I think that 3 feet gives us a little more flexibility there.
But I guess, Andrea, Andrea, why do I keep doing that, Angela? I am so sorry. Wow. I've been away for 2 weeks from the office, right? That must be the problem. But you know, I've spent a little time reading through the Massachusetts plan, and in their plan, they're not really differentiating that in-person instruction is better for our elementary students versus for high school students. I think generally, in-person instruction is going to be in the best interest of all of our students. And so as I think about this through my readings, I am not differentiating in my mind whether we just bring K through 5 back or middle school or high school. I really think for all of them academically, socially, emotionally, it needs to be an opportunity for all students to return to the classroom.
So given that and the prior conversations, what I am hearing is that there is still a belief that in-person learning if safety measures can be maintained, is our most effective means of learning with our students, that the risks the benefits outweigh the risks as long as we have those safety measures in place. And our priority has to be first and foremost around the hierarchy of needs, ensuring that we're focusing on safety, minimizing anxiety, and building that learning community in order for students to be prepared to learn the material that we will be able to move forward with our students. Is there anyone in this group that disagrees with that summary or would like to refine it?
Can I just add a little bit to it? Because I know the AAP also talked a lot about mitigating measures, not eliminating measures, and making sure we understand that the practices need to be practical, feasible, and to understand that we're doing that piece. We're not, it's the practices don't eliminate risk. They reduce, and we're doing the best we can to reduce risk.
And this, of course, if our data in our region suggests that the pandemic is taking shape and hold further, that we will need to follow any guidelines that suggest we are not in person, right? If all of a sudden we have a pretty significant outbreak and the state deems our region, let's say red, if they go in that direction, then it isn't a choice of district or committee. It is deemed essential that our students move to a remote experience, but that based on our beliefs and practices, if possible, we would prefer a universal in-person environment pre-K to 12.
Yes, but also with the understanding based on what other people have said, there may be times in which a family may believe it's in the best interest of their child to remain home and receive online remote instruction due to a medical issue or due to other factors.
So,
and I want to respect that.
We heard that multiple times. So while we believe in in-person, the amendment would be, we understand that each family has unique circumstances as well as our staff, and that we will create opportunities for students to access learning from home. And of course, there'll be practices that will allow for those options to take shape. It's not a just anyone, anytime, any random day. It'll be a guided procedure that folks will move forward with. And then we will find a strategy through the learning. There's core instruction committee to manage that.
And I would
I
just
thought there were a
add that-
few. Oh, sorry, Katie, go ahead.
Oh, I would just say that, I may have lost it. While at times it has been frustrating, it feels like this committee work is a real challenge without knowing the scenario. I think that the time and the thoughtful process of working through the different scenarios will serve us well, as we need to think comprehensively and flexibly and responsively to how things will likely change in the coming weeks, certainly, or even through the next season or two.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thank you, Katie. Molly?
I was going to add one of the same words that they say, to be flexible and nimble. And basically, we just have to be fluid and ready if something's not working, ready to kind of go to phase 2, try something else that will work for the teachers, the kids, the families. So
Great. Thank you. So we're going to actually, I know you could talk about this forever. Oh, Dean, do you need to add something?
Well, the only thing I wanted to add, there's been a group at the middle schools already talked about, if we do go back in full go mode, that there still should be, and this is a philosophical discussion that we've kind of had, there still should be some training on remote learning, so that if we do go, because one of the biggest things that we complained about amongst ourselves was, if we'd had another week before we went in March, we could have been so much better off, because we were getting to that point of actually rolling things out for the kids, and then boom, we get cut short. Well, we can't just go back, if we go back to in-person learning and say we're in-person learning and that's it. I think there has to be an element of, and I'm not saying 50% of the time, but a certain percentage of time needs to be devoted to, you know what, just in case we're gonna bone up on, Google Classroom or whatever it is.
And I agree with you, Dean. Outside of this committee work and my role as the director of curriculum and working with that district-wide PD committee that has membership from across the district, we have reserved time, regardless of how we start school, for in-person and remote training. And I don't think that will change. I think that will mirror what you're saying is critically important for our staff.
mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to transition to curriculum, teaching, and learning. We may have a little less time on this one because, we'll see how this goes. On this one, the decision is not what will be taught. The decision on what will be taught is in the hands of the teachers in coordination with any curriculum documents that we have shared that I help facilitate and organize. But the teachers working collaboratively and collectively at their grade level or in their content area have already engaged in a process in June on reflecting upon the spring experience and understanding what kind of data they have and what they know about their learners, and even their learners transitioning to the next grade level. And there'll be additional time in August for them to continue to refine that based upon whatever learning model or models we end up moving forward with. So I just want to be really clear about what our responsibility is. This is really, so that's the nitty gritty of what. This is really, what do we believe is essential to learn? And so do we believe, because of the national narrative and some of the readings you've had, that we should, if we move to outside of the traditional school setting, or even in this traditional school setting with increased safety measures, that we should refine our learning to core learning, which is considered reading, math, or literacy, math, science, and social studies? Or do we believe in a balanced curriculum, which means we believe that students learn best with the full approach or full suite of learning experiences to include physical education, visual and performing arts, library services, guidance services, those sorts of things, to be as an integral component of their learning environment. And then what practices do you need to support? What I heard already is Molly addressed all subjects. And then it was also addressed that it's important to meet kids where they are and be practical and realistic about that, and being cautious about catching up or trying to race through a curriculum. So those are the words that were already shared that relate to this. Feel free to open up the discussion.
So I'll add something in here. I was going to add this before, but I think this is where it fits. So I've been thinking a lot about this, how school would start, and thinking about what could happen in after school has already started. Like for me, right now, it's going to be all about building relationships. There's nothing else that I could do that would be more important when school starts, because I found from remote learning earlier, those kids that like came to me for a relationship last year are kind of the kids that kept coming back to me for the learning. And I didn't have to seek them out because they sought me out. And so as I left remote learning this summer, I was like, there's got to be a way I could make more relationships with my kids going forward, because I saw that even though I think that's a strength of mine, I felt like I could do better. So for me, the beginning of school, because I think things could change as we move forward, it's going to be all about relationships.
Thank you, Patsy. Jared?
I think one thing that occurred to me is very important, and it relates to something that Dean said, and Dean's point about PD related to remote learning. I think beyond even that, we know that reading and writing is an important part of learning, because it's how students gather information as well as express their learning. And one thing that I think we learned this spring, or at least I noticed, is the lack of digital literacy for our students. May have played a role in how well they could connect to their learning through a digital platform. And I think that if there's any way, while we're together in person, to, as Dean pointed out, kind of bone up for the students, they're getting those remote infrastructures in place, and making even some in-person learning partly about accessing digital resources so that we can grow their digital literacy skills. That will make it better if we end up in a situation where we do have to go back out. I think just because they all have, smartphones and are really good at entertaining themselves and doing certain activities with them. And I don't mean to disparage the students to say they're only entertaining themselves. That was my my slip up as a dad of an 8-year-old. But there's learning through digital technology is a different modality, and it's a different skill. And I think the extent to which we can prepare them and prepare ourselves to connect to that, should we have to, that would be a really important part of skill transfer beyond what I would call traditional kind of core content.
Karen?
The other thing I think we need to really pay attention to are all those risk factors of not coming back to school. So, they talked about suicide, the mortality, the depression, the anxiety, and research really does talk about how your physical health and well-being plays a direct impact on that. So I think it is important that we have phys ed. I know we're supposed to limit how much exercise and breathing we're doing in a space, but a lot of children, and I've been driving the streets, they're not outside playing. They're still in their apartments. They've lost that exercise and moving their bodies and the arts, making something, creating something. That's really part of life too. And so if we have to become socially distanced in our homes again, continuing to bring those practices into our homes, I think that's going to be really important too. I don't want to just go back to reading, writing, and math. I think kids need to remember life is more than that, and their physical health is dependent on that.
Mary?
So based upon what they've said too, if we only focused on those 4 content areas, we would have to revisit graduation requirements, because that has a big impact, because there are requirements for wellness for physical education, there are requirements for visual and performing arts. So that has an impact on high school graduation requirements. So if we decided to get rid of those, that would be something we'd have to consider. And then I think those, when you think about the reading from the pediatrics group, they talked a lot about those guidance pieces and those mental support pieces. And so if we've got to make sure that those pieces are there, and the relationships that Patsy talked about are really important in providing that support to our student population.
Is there anyone here who believes we should pare down the learning to the core? What I heard was a lot of social and emotional wellness work. It seems that if we are to move forward in that area, something that we would need in terms of a practice is opportunity for staff to develop some skills in, not just understand what the expectations are, but to further refine their skills in engaging in those relationships with students, so that they have lots of opportunities to consider what works for them based on their personality and their group of students in front of them, rather than just assuming that staff are adequately equipped to do that kind of work under these really changed conditions. I don't think it's fair just to ask staff to assume they know how to handle this. We have very experienced staff, so we're very fortunate. However, this is kind of new territory for everyone.
And I think sorry, Molly.
Molly and then Karen.
Who did you say?
Molly and then Karen.
Oh, I was just going to say, I just want to make sure, I don't know how much of our committee's role it is, but that the teachers have that, or the staff have that same kind of support as well, because they may agree or disagree with a lot of the choices, and just making sure that they have support.
Thank you for raising that up, Molly.
If they weren't their strengths.
Right. And Karen?
So one of the challenges we also had at my school for some of the older students, I had a couple parents who were very intense about, they want more work, give me more work. My child's falling behind. They were very, very anxious about that. And I think it's going to be really important that our beliefs are communicated as well to our community, so that they don't feel like the school is not doing their job to hurry up and catch them up. Where are the accelerated learning opportunities? I want to get my child caught up back to the standards they need to be at. There's going to be a big adjustment, and I think families need to hear that as well.
So it sounds like there's an opportunity to connect the research we know about how people learn with this particular situation, and use that as part of our communication strategy about why the curriculum is going to be adjusted. And there's a huge body of evidence about how people learn and the conditions that are necessary for that, and we can draw upon that to clarify, and then that will equalize the environment. And then it doesn't mean we'll hold kids back. If students are ready and have all the factors that indicate they are ready to learn, they will have opportunity to learn. I think our teachers are pretty skilled in that, and we can work collectively as a group to ensure that kids aren't held back, but that first we're attending to those critical wellness needs. Great, I think we can have that piece be a part of this, the outcome of this work. I'm going to move us into some of the more concrete pieces, I guess. The next one is use of space. We actually brought this one up a little bit in our core instruction meeting this morning, because we are starting to try to understand physical spaces, just like facilities has been, as they explore each of the buildings, and I'm sure others as well. So where do we believe our students and staff can learn while reducing the risk? There were some suggestions and guidelines in all of the documents shared with you. I'll put it out there that one of the suggestions was to enable and support outdoor learning environments. Sometimes the risks of that, depending on the age group of the students, historically in other districts have outweighed the benefits, depending on where those districts are. So if you look at the Massachusetts Department of Education, they say when outside sources are available and safe, they highly encourage it, but there are probably some urban settings where their outdoor space is not ideal. And so therefore they have that flexibility. We live in a very rural area, or fairly rural area. We have a community school structure, and we do have some outdoor space. That's only one of the use of space options. A couple other things that came up this morning was about, do we have any rooms that don't have proper ventilation? And would we need to consider reassigning some learning spaces as a result of that? If there's anything in a basement without a window or something like that, I'm not versed in that at the moment. But be thinking about your reading, the guidelines that you saw, and the medical readings or the guidelines from the medical community, and let's discuss use of space.
Well, I'll start off. I was actually reading the CDC guidance, and they were encouraging school districts to close communal use shared spaces such as the dining halls, the playgrounds, when there's shared playground equipment. I don't know how I feel about the playgrounds at this point. It is so important for especially our elementary students to engage in physical activity throughout the day. So I do want us to find a way, and I'm not an expert in the elementary scheduling that the elementary principals are, but I think it's really important that we do find opportunities for especially our elementary students to be able to get outside, and to be physically active. I do think that we have some common spaces in all of our buildings that we could consider using in other ways if we decide through the food service team, through that commitment that children are not going to eat in the lunchroom and they're going to maybe eat elsewhere. There's an opportunity maybe for classes there. Our elementary buildings, they do not have PE every day. So for those particular buildings that have a separate gymnasium, is there a way for us to use those spaces throughout the school day to help ensure the physical distancing that you may not be able to achieve in every single classroom? Some classrooms are smaller than others. So as I think about this one, I think that there are opportunities within our buildings for us to decide and to use in a fashion different from what that particular space was designed for.
Go ahead, Mary.
So also I picked up on the reading when I was doing the one from the pediatrics group about using cohorts. So like out on the playground, it talked about having a cohort of students who played together all the time, so that those students were exposed to just that small group of students, which I think is what our athletic groups are doing right now too. As they're working in smaller groups and doing their training and stuff, I believe they're working with the same group of students throughout the work. And that might also work within our classrooms to a certain extent as well. A little harder at the high school because we have kids who might be in my class, but they take a different class than other students in that same room. So some of that I'm looking at through the high school lens, which could be a little more challenging, but the use of common cohort groups as we work might be an important aspect to being able to use the space that we have as well.
And I noticed, Mary, they didn't actually provide guidelines in the AAP article on cohort size. They specifically said, as you develop your cohorts to keep those groups of students together. That's an interesting thing because like the Piston Randolph, we have a K1 wing, and it seems that they would probably be close together. However, when you go and it's, I don't know, 80 kids maybe total. And then you go to the middle school and you're set up by teams. But physically, I don't know if those teams are, Dean would know better, or if those teams are really isolated anyway, or engage in some of those outside of academic classroom sessions together, or could they? Karen?
When the AAP article talked about the playgrounds, they did talk about hand washing before and after use of the playground. So I personally believe the same thing. Kids need to be outside. They need to be using that equipment. They need to be engaged in that play. The playground equipment we have is developmentally appropriate to their growing needs. So I feel like as long as we are maybe limiting the number of kids at a time out there, and they are required to wash their hands before they go out, and then they wash their hands again when they come in, that would be what that guidance was suggesting us.
And I would add to that, Karen, the spacing between students when they're on playground equipment would be greater than if they were probably playing in the field, where they're more likely to be close to each other, touching each other. So one other thing that I have been thinking about environments where kids best, they're free from as many distractions as possible, so that we can just have a sort of flow to the learning day. And it makes me think about visitors in the school. And though there are so many benefits to having volunteers and visitors, I think at this point, to minimize the risk, the recommendation I'm reading, certainly in the AAP document, spoke to limiting that.
It makes me think about substitutes, and do we need an alternate approach to how we manage substitutes right now? Because a substitute could be in a different building every day of the week. And is that something we're comfortable with, or would someone choose not to be a substitute because they could choose to be in a different building every day of the week? And our substitute pool is shared with other school communities. And so it is just, as Katie's raising the question about visitors to school and possibly in parents into the school building, the reality is we will need substitutes likely. And is there a way that we can think strategically about how to maybe have some consistent substitutes in each learning space? That's my timer to keep us rolling. But so that's just something that's been brought up for me.
And for the time being as well, when you talk about visitors, some of the things that have made our school cultures so positive is that we do have visitors and parents coming in for assemblies and pancake breakfasts and that feeling of inclusiveness. And I think, again, it's going to be really important to communicate why we can't do that if we come back in person, that parents are going to really have to understand. We're going to put that on pause in favor of having your child be back in our school physically.
So far what I'm hearing is that maybe we need to do a little bit more research into the use of communal spaces. I know the core instruction committee is doing that, and what we discuss is in alignment with what this group is discussing. So there's nothing that's coming up as a red flag for me. But we want to make sure that, some organizations are saying close these communal spaces, and other medical organizations are saying you can use them with cohort models and safety measures being applied. So I think that is something that needs a little further discovery to make sure we come to a space that we're all feel comfortable that we're making the right decision, the safe decision for our staff and our students. That we do need to limit our visitors, and that includes all different types of visitors into our spaces for a period of time. And that we need to look at in the instruction model, the approach to cohorting, which will then turn into building principals looking at their schedules to figure out if that's a feasible option. Is there anything else around that discussion that you think we didn't uncover that we need to make sure is raised? Okay. I think we're making some progress, at least I'm coming to some, we have a lot more agreement than maybe we even knew. So this is great. Face coverings. I didn't want to save this one for last on purpose. So as you know, the national narrative is really split on this, but what we're trying to do as a school community needs to be doing our due diligence in maintaining safety for all staff and all students is really understanding what is the guidance coming from the medical community. So probably referencing some of the State Department of Ed guidelines is okay if we understand that they were developed in concert or in collaboration with the medical community. So you would have had to do your research on that. So right now, the reading that we asked you to use was the American Academy of Pediatrics. And if you have other guidelines, such as the CDC or another health institution that's considered a reputable source, then please raise that and feel free to discuss it. There are differing views. So and of course, the state could set guidelines on this for us to a degree, right? We're not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure if that's going to happen. I'm not sure where they're weighing in on this. I know that they're willing to provide face coverings, but I'm not sure if they're then willing to say they need to be or not worn. So if districts have the opportunity to define what face coverings are worn, when do we believe they are most effective, and what practices will support that belief? Go ahead.
One of the things that I remember hearing, I think it was in the Frankfurt International School webinar that we watched a little while back, was that when students are on the move, or certainly out and about transitioning, that they would be wearing masks when they're seated at a safe distance away from others, and in their classroom spaces, they would be okay to remove the covering. I'm just thinking aloud. Not an expert on masks yet. Certainly I heard the same thing, or I remember seeing and hearing and reading the same things for staff members when standing in front of a group delivering instruction. The mask would be certainly off. And we also have talked in different groups about the use of a shield when it would be more appropriate. I mean, it's arguable that it would always be more appropriate to use a shield, but I'm not sure that that's, a reality for us, but certainly for students who need to see the entire face of the instructor or the person speaking, that will be really important.
And if I could just add to that, just so everyone here knows, as a school district, we have already purchased a face shield for every employee. And we have also purchased a face mask for every employee, and enough for a mask for all students grades 6 through 12. We have not purchased anything for our elementary students, but a face shield is an option. As we talk about masks, especially for our younger students, the more I've been thinking about this, I'm actually wishing I had ordered more masks than just enough for every staff member. I wish I had ordered more, understanding that we do have substitutes who come in who could use them. We have older students with medical issues. We have younger students, but who also have those medical issues, and who maybe a mask isn't appropriate. It's just at the time when I purchased those shields were for adults only, not students. But I would just kind of throw that out. So we already do have those supplies, and we could certainly think about a face shield for some of our younger students, knowing that a mask may not work well for some of our younger students. You know, when I was looking at again, I was going through all of these, but with the CDC, you know, definitely their recommendation is that the masks work better with older students. And that there were recommendations that you really do not have masks for our students pre-K through 2. That once they get to 3rd grade up, that is, it's better. I still think it's extremely difficult for students pre-K through 5 because they're going to be naturally touching their face. Taking it off, it's going to be uncomfortable. And I am with Katie that they talk about the need to wear masks or shields when there is the inability to ensure the physical distancing. But as long as there are provisions in the classroom where there are at least 3 to 6 feet apart, then those masks and shields do not have to be worn.
Mary?
I would add to that too, based upon the reading, either the CDC reading, I can't remember exactly which one I read it in, is that all of the students are facing in the same direction, which is different than our grouping piece, because I think that's a piece about why we could take them off in the classroom, because they would all be facing the same direction instead of one student looking at another student, and if they're talking without a mask, having the spread of particles going around.
So that's actually an interesting point of use of space, Mary, because in many elementary environments and even in your science classroom, right, you're set up with a table structure where students may or may not be sitting in pods facing each other. And can we adjust our use of space to allow for that recommendation of students essentially sitting in rows looking in one direction? I'm just going to raise up Terry and Gabe if you do have things to add to make sure that I want to make sure you have the opportunity. Becky, the same with you. If you are more confident and comfortable just agreeing with what you're hearing, that is also okay. I just want to make sure that you know that.
Sure. Actually, if I can add a little bit to the classroom distancing, I actually spent a little time at the high school today just looking at some of the seating arrangements. It's a good time right now because all the additional items are out of the classrooms because they're doing the floor, so I can really see the floor space. So I tried to lay out some of the seating where it's the desk chair combo units, and to get the units in there, if we are going to, if it was, we had to stay 6 feet apart to be able to take a mask off. We're not going to be able to fit very many desks in the classroom. That's for sure. On an average classroom at the high school, I can fit about 12 desks in the classroom. If that number goes down to 3 feet, I understand it's about half, but we can fit even more than what I thought. It basically puts the desk down to as many desks in a classroom as they normally would have had in there now. It brings it to anywhere between 24 to 27 desks that I can fit in a classroom, 3 feet apart. The one criteria would be as soon as that student gets up to move around the classroom, they would have to put their mask on before they were to get up, to go to the front, to go to the bathroom, wherever they're going to go, because that puts them in the aisle position, and the aisle position obviously is within 3 feet of another student that's sitting adjacent to them. And I did set it up as rows, so they were all facing the same direction. I have not gone over to the science side of the building to see how we could try to work that. Sorry, Mary. That'll be tomorrow.
I think there are 3 rooms really to look at, Gabe. Chad and I chatted about this last week. Would be my room, 505, 507, and 509. Where the chemistry rooms with the tall counters, The
Okay.
rest of the staff have those counters that are seat height around the rest of the rooms. Ours are standing height like you have in your kitchen. And if we could, one of the things Chad and I talked about was either replacing our tables with desks, which would be more expensive, because we have that solid island, you can't move it. Or doing some stools like Diane Lane has in the office that would allow students to sit those counters. We could then spread our students out a little bit more. And those are the 3 classrooms I think we might have the worst or the most difficult time spreading them out in.
Okay. Yep. I'll spend some time and I'll take a look and see what I can do.
I'm aware of the time. I want to just let's quickly address 3 feet versus 6 feet based on the readings that you had. And then we may reflect on this conversation between now and next week and see if we need to revisit a couple specific questions with this group. But 3 feet versus 6 feet, the guidance has been varying from different medical organizations.
I think 6 feet is really difficult for us to bring our students back in. I don't think we have the space in many, if any, of our classrooms to do that, as Gabe said. But if anytime, I think if we could go 3 feet and put on masks when they move, I think that would be most appropriate. And if you think about the Frankfurt Institute, they used 1.5 meters, and I was just doing a quick conversion. I think that's around 4-ish feet or so, 4 to 5 feet. So they even are shorter than they're less than the 6 foot distance anyway.
And I would echo that for elementary. I think we could do a 3-foot spacing. I think about the tables that we have in most of our classrooms. I think about the center-based instruction that kids sit and they play games on the floor. They could be designated spots so that teachers could have them already pre-measured, so you could still have your centers and be on the floor doing a center, but the teacher could manage that spacing a little bit easier, 3 feet apart than certainly 6. The other thing I just want to kind of put out there too is the guidance from the AAP is even if students are not required to wear face coverings, that all the adults should be doing that all day long. Mm-hmm. So it would be very easy to think, okay, well, my kids aren't wearing any masks, then I don't need to wear a mask and not having that. But I think that's going to be something we have to land on as well as, well, if the kids aren't doing it, the adults, because the adults are certainly at more risk than the children based on the science.
I agree with what Mary and Karen have said. And I think that if we could get 6 feet in those high traffic areas where mass groups of people will be traveling, again, one way is great where we can, but we won't be able to do that everywhere. And I think realistically in confined learning spaces, if we could get 3 feet with masks.
Using that cohort approach, keeping the same kids in the same spaces.
Yep, exactly.
Molly, did you want to add something?
It's just kind of a side note to it all, but if we are addressing masks with the kids at all, it's for the communications, using social skills videos, I think it said, or behavior technique videos, if we could push those out on the website. Like, I think you had mentioned that, but I hadn't really heard of the social skills stories as such. And I think that would be really effective if they had different ways to relate to it. So.
That's excellent. Thank you. So likely after some reflection, we'll need to revisit a couple of these conversations just for clarity, and you'll be thinking about this. But at this point in time, there's some reorganization of space. There's some strategies on face coverings will need to happen, but there may be some conditions when face coverings can be removed for the students. And that we can look to the guidance that allows for 6 feet versus 3 feet, 3 feet within the communal spaces that are shared within a small cohort group, versus when you're in a more, I use the word communal wrong, when you're in a more community space that's shared across cohorts, like a hallway, that a 6 foot distance is something we should probably try to strive for. And of course, face coverings, especially in those spaces. So because of time, I think we made it pretty far. I'm really impressed. We got a lot accomplished and discussed. Mary, I took some notes. I know that you were taking some notes, so we'll double check those, and maybe need to lift up a couple elements next week. We also have other discussions, but I'll wait for Pat to think about how she wants to organize that. I think Pat will be out Monday, and so that's a Becky conversation as well. Did you want to add something?
I just see Patsy and Katie have something that they want to add.
Great.
So Patsy.
Okay, so I just want to throw this out there, like, and I'm gonna, I guess I have to do a little more reading too to make myself feel at ease. Like, I feel like, yes, 3 feet would definitely work better in schools. I mean, I totally understand that, but I don't think COVID cares whether it's, you know, it's gonna do what it's gonna do. And so if I can feel safe at 3 feet, then that's what I think we need to, like, kind of get to the rest of our staff. Like, I'm not sure I feel safe at 3 feet, but I might feel safe at 3 feet when I get a little more information. Like, I don't want to agree in this realm that if we can do 3 feet, because 3 feet makes everything easier for us. And I get that it does. And I would love that if it would work, but I don't think the virus cares, you know? And so I'm just throwing it out there for safety reasons, I guess, is what I'm saying.
So there's a couple ways we can do this. We have some liaisons with Maine General, and there also are other organizations, medical organizations, that we can do some homework. So why don't we actually do some homework on the 3 feet versus 6 feet? It's always changing. So there's going to be more and more information out this week and next week. And let's revisit that particular space, because that's a really valid point, Patsy, and one we need to take great care in coming to an understanding. I think Katie and then Jared, I think we'll need to wrap up, but I want to make sure we catch you.
Yeah, thanks. Really quickly, one of the things that I hadn't noticed in my notes from the AAP reading is the safety for safety within the building. Try to just prop some doors so that you don't have to keep touching the door handles. We don't have people over and over and over again touching the same spaces. And I just want all of us to be considering, and I know that Gabe and the committees are thinking about all the time that we've spent on our safety plans. Just being mindful of that planning and making sure that that jives with some of the new safety steps that we'll be taking.
Thank you. I noticed that too. I wondered if the facilities crew had considered that in light of our safety measures. I'm sure building principals would be getting to that as soon as they recognize that as well. Jared, did you have something you wanted to add?
Nope. If I signaled you, I didn't mean to.
Okay. So we're going to revisit a few of these. I'll check in with Pat and Becky to see what direction they want to go in, and they may choose to facilitate that conversation. But it looks like we have some shared agreements in a few areas that we're going to continue to revisit as the medical community becomes more and more clear about the guidance.
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate it. This was a great conversation, and I look forward to hearing really where we land on these issues. As Angela said, I will be out next Monday. Becky will be the chair of the committee. I will have an agenda ready to be shared with all of you next Thursday. The link to this meeting is in the calendar. The calendar that I sent to you has repeat ability. So therefore, next week, all you need to do is go back into the calendar and you can hit the Google Meet section, that little click, and that will get you onto the meeting. So is there anything else before we go?
Pat, I'll just add, if they accept your invitation, if they go to the Google Meets app, it shows up right on there and you can click there and don't have to go to your calendar.
Oh, great. Thank you, Mary. All right, if there is nothing else, then thank you all. Appreciate your time, and we will see you, well, you'll see each